Every year about this time, we get a chance to sit down with CIF Southern Section Commissioner and Long Beach guy Rob Wigod to talk about pretty much everything in the CIF Southern Section. But because it happens in August, we end up talking about football a lot. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, one of the stories that we're working on right now is trying to figure out why there are fewer high school football players every year here in California. We will spit the numbers at you in just a second with Commissioner Wigod. But Mike, talking to the commissioner is always really fun, but when the commissioner is a Long Beach guy, it's almost easier to talk to him because we don't have to explain every angle we're trying to take. Because he already knows. Like 4 years ago when we started doing the facilities here in Long Beach, why we didn't need to explain it to Wigod. Wigod knew exactly what we were talking about.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's always a treat sitting down. And we've known him for a long time. We were there at his press conference when he got the job. Wilson alum who also coached at his alma mater as well as Lakewood and Los Al.
The commish, thanks so much for joining us. You guys are already into your 2019-2020 athletic season. How's it going so far?
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I always enjoy the chance to talk with you. And we are full-time, ready to go. We start 0-week football a week from Friday. We've got, as we call it, Eligibility Central going on right now with a lot of new schools and students and people getting ready for the school year that started for some and is going to be starting pretty soon for the rest of them. So it's that time of year for us. August is an exciting time. Lots to look forward to, and we're ready to go.
We are ready to go to the biggest issue we've been talking about in the last week has been the numbers coming out of the CIF state office talking about how the participation numbers for football is down. 4 years ago, there were almost 104,000 kids playing football here in California, and this year it's about 91,000. So in a 4-year span, that's a pretty big change. Why do you think that's happening, and are you concerned with that change?
Well, we certainly are concerned. I think high school football is one of the greatest things that a young person can be involved in, high school athletics in general. But I think there's a message out there that football is a risky sport, that there's inherent risks of injury and serious injuries, obviously. And I'd like to offer that I think over the last 20 years or so, and even more recently than that, there have been tremendous numbers of measures taken, rules that have changed, things that have been done to try to make the game safer. So I would offer that it potentially is really safer today than it has been. Things like concussion awareness and protocols, the return to play, the heat illness and hydration information, the limits on how many hours of contact you can have, minutes of contact you can have during a week, the playing rules of helmet-to-helmet contact, blocking below the waist, all these kinds of things have really been done to try to make the game safer. I'm not sure that message is getting out as much as it could, but I certainly hope there's a way that we can turn those numbers around and maybe get some more student athletes involved in the sport of football.
You're in an interesting position because obviously football is sort of the biggest. JD and I always tell people football, in terms of fan interest, is about 50% of what all of our readers are interested in, right? That one sport's about half of it. All of the other, however many dozen sports is the other 50%. So you're aware of the cultural significance, the interest. You've talked about the great things it can do specifically. What's interesting to me about the numbers from the CIF state is overall participation numbers are up. There's more kids playing high school sports now. There's just 12,000 fewer kids playing high school football. If that trend continues, if more kids are playing high school sports but less and less and less are playing football, do you think losing that sport specifically does take away from what kids are getting or the fabric of the scene on the state level? If there's 50,000 more kids playing high school sports in 5 years, but high school football programs have been cut at half the schools in the state, would you look at that as a net failure, I guess, or a net negative thing?
Well, you'd have to look at, again, reasons why, and hopefully there would be some information that if there was a way to address why people are not playing in a way to maybe try to correct it and keep them involved or get more young people involved. It's really hard to know. I think high school football is a great thing. It's a special thing. But as I said, I don't want it to all be about that. There's so many sports involved in what we do and experiences for students and student athletes that I don't want to just focus completely on football, but it is something unique about it and what it does on a campus and what it does for a community and traditions and things that make football different than maybe some other sports. But I think we are genuinely concerned about what this might look like in 5 years. and we need to keep addressing it and try to find out what those reasons are and make an effort to try to turn it in the other direction. Before we came on, I mentioned our coaches. I think our coaches play a huge role in the kind of environment they foster in their football programs, and there's a lot of different factors along with that. Certainly the commitment that they ask of students and their parents all year round. I think that's certainly affected our multi-sport athletes, but maybe even just students who don't want to play football anymore because of what they're required to do outside the season. Everyone loves to suit up on Friday night, but that 9 months between seasons is a long time. And if the students are constantly having to put more and more into that 9 months, it may take away from those and wanting to stay with it. So there's just a lot of different facets of this, but it is definitely something that we have to be aware of and hopefully can turn around.
We've seen a few teams here in California have the program shut down because of numbers. Recently, there was one pretty close to Long Beach, middle of the season, don't have enough kids, got to shut it down. You talked about safety. Is it less safe the fewer kids playing football? We've got a couple teams in the Moore League who have very small numbers. Does it become less safe for those kids when there are fewer guys on the football team?
I think that's absolutely true, unfortunately. One of the great things about football is it gives an opportunity for a lot of students to participate. But when you're down in numbers and you have several players playing both offense and defense and maybe most of your special teams, that's going to take a physical toll. Just the number of hits that you take, the number of times you're running up and down the field, and over a course of a 10-game season and all the rest that goes with it, I don't think there's any question that it can affect your team. It can affect the depth of your team and your team's ability to compete. So, I've coached where we had to have guys being offensive players and defensive players the whole time, and that asks a lot of a player. And it's always a goal if you can get 22 starters on offense and defense, and even have some behind them and some good quality depth, because I think it is going to make it safer for those students involved. I don't think there's any question.
In the future, could you see the possibility of maybe some schools who have small teams like that combining their teams and maybe making a team for 2 schools or a team for 3 schools or a team for a district that's having trouble with numbers?
That's a great question, and we do some work and have some dialogue with other states, and especially specifically in the West. And some of our states are definitely involved in that, where they are combining teams because the 2 schools can't support their own, but yet together they would have enough players. And so I'm not saying that that's necessarily going to happen, next year or the year after, but I can tell you it might be a way to continue to allow schools to participate. And you have to think a little bit outside the box, so to speak, and allow different kinds of formats so that instead of 2 schools dropping a sport, they can both have students interested in playing it, but under a different format that obviously that we're used to.
There's another big change coming for football this year, and that's the playoffs. So for, let's say, a high school football fan who hasn't been paying attention, comes back in, and all of a sudden there's a different playoff system, how would you explain to them the separation now between Divisions 1 and 2?
We have decided, as we always were going to decide as in working with our coaches advisory committee, there's things that we've learned. This has had 3 years of competitive equity playoffs, and what we've learned is that at some examples, the separation among teams based on their performances gets a little bit larger and larger. So if that's the case, then you might just have fewer teams at the very top because that's the teams that belong. And competitive equity playoffs is not about filling a bracket. It's not about saying we have to have 16 teams. No matter who you are, you're going to go in there and play. That's what we had before. Then we'd have the 40 and 50 point first round non-contest. So if that means we're going to have,
we covered a couple of those.
I'm sure that you have, and it's not good for the students. It's not good for the coaches, the fans, the reporters.
It's not great for the reporters.
The
either,
officials.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not good for anybody, and that was obviously a big part of why we tried to make some changes in our competitive equity playoff system. So, like I said, we've learned some things over 3 years. And one of those is that maybe that separation at the very top gets a little bit larger, a little bit wider. And if that's the case, then there might be fewer teams that compete in that division. But it's not because they're being selected or chosen or separated out. It's because that's what the numbers dictate. That's what the power rankings indicate, that there's just a big break between that group of schools and the group below. So let's put the right schools together. That's the whole point of this the entire system.
So with the Division 1, which is it's like a de facto open division. I understand it's not the same as your guys' open divisions, but that's the best of the best, right? The top 8 teams from that 24 team Division 1/2 pool to what extent could you say you've had the same two teams play for the championship the last few years in a row? What's the smallest it could get? I mean, I think there's plenty of people could say we could pick the top 4 teams right now. We could pick the top probably 2 teams. To what extent is the bracket necessary when you have the separation of especially 2 programs that have been year in and year out? And how small could you see that division going in the future?
It remains to be seen. I think it's a little bit too early to speculate. We're just going to go from 16 to 8 this year. But remember now, we're going to be including the regular season results to pick those 8. So in the past, as we've formulated divisions, we've used the last 2 years of data. This year, for that Division 1-2 combination, we're going to use the regular season results along with the power rankings as the season started and really choose those very best 8 teams. So if we're doing it in that format, I'm not so sure that it's going to reduce more and more down the road, but the power rankings will determine that, and we'll see how it goes. But I know, like I said, last year we learned that schools that came out of Division 2, some schools would belong in Division 1 and some didn't. Well, now that won't happen. If you belong in Division 1, you'll be there, and if you don't, you won't. And that'll be a good positive step forward for this particular year. And like I said, we're continuing to learn. We're going to evolve. This thing, we said from the beginning, what we started with was not what it was going to be. And one of the big keys is to use regular season results. And we're going to even use football this year as a test run to see if we can use regular season results in all divisions the year after.
One thing we've reminded fans of is, like Poly and Mater Dei also played 3 years in a row for a CIF championship in the 90s. So the concentration of talent is not necessarily new, but it does seem to us that across more sports, your top 1 or 2 teams are really, really these huge, groupings of talent that have come together. What do you think of that trend? What do you think is behind that? And what are your thoughts on it as commissioner? Do you know what I mean? On the one hand, you have a Sierra Canyon where everyone's going to want to come see them.
Right.
They have all these superstars. On the other hand, it's certainly not the way it was 15 years ago where you're going, there's 8 teams that could win the basketball CIF championship, and all this. What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, there's a couple thoughts there, and it's interesting that last little comment that you made. The first round of the Open Division Boys Basketball Championships last year, the number 8 seed beat number 1. So I think the question is there competition there? Now, you mentioned the Bosco Mater Dei thing. I would still say the same thing. Are they competitive with each other? Is that championship game been a cakewalk for one team or another? I don't think so. Sierra Canyon 2 years ago didn't win the section championship, even though they did happen to come back and win the state championship. So I still think there's competition in our section among these top teams. Now, Centennial won it 2 years in a row, kind of before this Bosco Mater Dei phenomenon you want to call it, I don't know. Mater Dei has won the last 2 section football championships. They had not won a section football championship in 20 years. 20 years. So there's a sense that, oh my gosh, Mater Dei's been this dominant program. Well, they've been a good program, but they've won 2 championships in a row and hadn't won one for 20 years prior to that. So I still think you have to keep things in perspective. I hope that people realize these are not necessarily the rule in our section. These are the exceptions. These kinds of schools and those particular programs, we have far, 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 far many more schools that are not in that same environment. So in today's age, there are people that want to be at the top. They want to go to the school where they think is the best. You ask those schools, they lose plenty of students too, who think that they're at that level and can't compete there. But once you start being successful, you play on TV, you play other schools around the country. There's a certain aspect of that that's attractive to people. It's attractive to students. It's attractive to parents. And so good programs are going to attract players, and the important thing is, are those players coming there under the rules? And if that's the case, then I get there's frustration and the rest, but unless there's something that's involved without the rules being followed, then I think we have to accept that people are going to choose where they want to go.
Right.
And as long as they do it under the rules, it's kind of hard to deal with that.
Yeah. I was talking to a Long Beach athletic director the other day, and I asked him, if you were taking over a big school, what would be the most important sport to be successful for his entire athletic program to be successful? And he said that it was the club sports, volleyball, soccer, water polo. Those were the most important sports to be good. They could lift all ships because that tide is based on parent support, kids' dedication, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But when you're also talking about those club sports, you're talking about a group of kids who are going outside for a literal extracurricular activity. And then you have seen the decline in, Mike and I have seen a lot fewer Long Beach kids playing soccer at their school because the club soccer schedule is so different now, pushes them into the season and all that stuff. Are you guys at all concerned with the growing number of club sports kids effectively doing what's happening right now to football, which is taking the number of total participants down?
I may look at it differently than others. I believe that what we do, we're the only ones who do it. We are the only ones that have education-based athletics. We're educating the total student, and we're using that experience to teach them life lessons that they'll have forever. Clubs, and I have no negative thing to say. I had a daughter who played club soccer who had wonderful coaches and a great experience. But that's not the same priority that we have. Again, our mission at the CIF and the CIF Southern Section is not to develop professional and college athletes. That's not who we are. That's a very small number of the student athletes involved. Are we proud of them? Absolutely. Do we celebrate their success when they go to the college ranks, the pro ranks, the Olympic ranks? No question about it. But that's not who we are. And that's really important for people to realize. Back to the point about those who choose maybe not to play, there are still plenty of young people who do choose to play. And I think we're strong enough and our product is strong enough that we can handle, at our schools, it's no less meaningful when they raise that championship plaque because 2 or 3 of the students maybe didn't come out to play with them and stayed with the club team. It doesn't change. It's still every bit as important, and I think we're still going to have student athletes who care about their school, care about being part of their school, and going out there and doing their best with their teammates, their friends, and those that are involved in the entire student experience, not just the club sport that they do, in the evenings and on weekends.
For the last year, Mike and I have been talking about the mascot situation at Long Beach State. Actually, it's been for like the last 10 years, if we're being really honest with you. And there are schools in the southern section and all over California that have mascots that you could see in the future maybe being an issue. What would your advice be? Let's say, for example, there's a group of athletes and students at Compton Centennial, and they want to change their mascot. What would your advice to that group of students be?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to give the answer from my perspective as the CIF Southern Section Commissioner. But I think obviously,
just Rob Wigod.
No, but mascots are important. Mascots are huge to schools at any level, and there's such a tradition with those mascots and a community identity with those mascots, and so it's a real precious thing for a school to have. And if there's a movement to have it changed because of certain reasons or other things that they believe need to get that mascot to change, then those are the decisions those communities have to make. I personally, you have to try to sit in the seat of those who feel affected by a mascot that is offensive or has created hard feelings or bad feelings about a school and so forth. And obviously those concerns need to be listened to and decisions need to be made on what to do about those concerns. I mean, as a Long Beach State alum, and I've been, I think, pretty clear that I was disappointed to see what Long Beach State has done. I don't know that if that was my decision, that it was my decision that I would have made. But again, am I being respectful of and conscious of those who felt that there should be a change made? And that's important perspective that, being a much older guy and a guy who got out of there a long time ago, maybe times have changed and maybe there have to be things that are considered now that were maybe not considered over the years.
I'm really happy JJ asked you that question. I thought we were going to do that off the radio, but that's great.
You're not that old, by the way.
Yes,
you're
I am.
a much older guy.
Yes,
I
I
am.
am.
Older than we think we
yes,
are.
I am.
You're very young.
Yes, I am.
You're still very young for a Long Beach State fan.
I turned 60 in April, so I got shirts older than you guys.
I think that puts you on the youngest 10% of Long Beach State fans, just based on
I'm not
that
sure if that's
ocular
the case
survey
too,
of the
but my
pyramid.
mother's 86 and she graduated from Long Beach State and she's still a fan too. So
Looking good for 60.
Well, I'm hanging in there.
Say.
You know what? Keeping yourself involved in something like this and being around high school student athletes, which I've been doing since I was 19 years old, I think it does have that effect a little bit. There's just an energy and a passion and a part of what we do every day. And the people that you meet who really do care about, helping young people out, that's a motivator. And it does, I think, kind of keep you energetic and inspired and motivated.
So I'm going to guess that this podcast is not where you're going to choose to break enormous news, but I know you guys have been moving down the road of talking about and having a committee meeting about future policies regarding transfers. Do you have anything to share with us? Where are you guys in that process?
Oh, I
right
do.
now?
I mean, the final meeting of the Transfer Rules Committee is tomorrow, and it's been made up of 9 representatives from all the geographic areas of our section. And I think we've spent virtually the last school year almost examining, taking a survey of our membership, having meetings, letting these representatives talk to their areas, their leagues, their schools, and get a real sense of where we are with transfer rules. They make the rules. People forget that. People think Rob makes the rules and others. No, the schools make them. They need opportunities to discuss these rules and decide what they want to do. So I'm very interested to see how tomorrow goes. I mean, you can study forever. It's time to say, okay, I think we've devoted a good amount of time to this. Where are you? And we're going to sit down tomorrow and decide whether we go forward with some potential rules changes, whether people feel that there have been some changes already made. I mean, if you look back at it, January 1, we kind of standardized and tightened up the valid residence change rule. A year before that, we did something with the international student rule. Before that, we did something with the sit-out period rule and standardized that. So there have been some recent things that have made some changes.
Are there less kids moving this year?
Well, we had a reduction in transfers last year, a significant reduction, not just Southern Section, but actually statewide. And when you look at the numbers anyway, there's 400,000 student athletes approximately, and about 15,000 of them transfer. So you're talking about less than 2% of student athletes that actually transfer in a given school year. And I know there's a lot of focus on that, certainly on high-profile transfers. People think it's a rampant issue and a rampant problem. I don't know. If you look at numbers and break them down, you're not really looking at that many student athletes that are moving. There's 385,000 of them that are staying home and staying where they are. So I think it's going to be a great opportunity tomorrow to find out where our section is after a real good and comprehensive study, and then we'll see. Some people have expectations that the entire apple cart's going to be overturned and there's going to be massive changes coming down the pike. That might be the case. Or they may look at it and say, I think where we are right now, for now, leave it as is, knowing that we'll continue that discussion.
Well, as always, the Candid Commish, we really appreciate you taking the time, and we will see you in the stands real soon.
Well, you look forward to that, guys, and thank you for everything you're doing, and love talking to you.